interacting with visitors, participating in festivities, and dealing with situations that were completely opposite to the tranquility they expected to find, was a reality for many nuns. For countless women in the Middle Ages, joining a convent was not a question of vocation, but the only possible alternative in a society that left them with no choice. Without the possibility of marriage and prevented from inheriting land or property, they were left with only the uncertainty of poverty. Faced with this scenario, becoming a nun was the only way to guarantee sustenance and protection, avoiding abandonment and marginalization. Surviving in the Middle Ages was an unrelenting challenge. Epidemics ravaged entire cities, wars destroyed villages, and insecurity was present on every corner. In this context, many young women were forced into monasteries as a forced refuge. It was believed that only virgin women could enter religious life, and in certain cases, tests were even carried out to prove this condition. However, medicine at the time was rudimentary, and few bothered to strictly monitor these criteria. Once inside the convents, the novices were required to lead an exemplary life, without any contact with men and dedicated exclusively to prayer, work, and monastic discipline. They were called brides of Christ, but human nature could not be erased by simple imposition. Repressing desires and emotions was a constant challenge. To avoid any distraction or impure thought, the nuns' routine was structured in an exhaustive way, ensuring that they were busy from dawn to dusk. The day began with long periods of prayer, followed by endless household chores and community service. Far from the absolute seclusion that was imagined, many had obligations that kept them in contact with outsiders, receiving people seeking assistance, food, or spiritual guidance. When night finally fell, exhaustion took over, and all that was left for them was the desire to rest and prepare for another day of intense obligations. The nuns' clothing served not only to protect them from the cold, but also had a symbolic and practical purpose: to ward off unwanted glances and to prevent any kind of forbidden thought, both for themselves and for the men around them. The vow of chastity was not just a promise, but a lifelong obligation, something that had to be maintained at all costs. However, repressing natural impulses was never an easy task, and some nuns resorted to extreme measures to stifle any desires considered sinful. There are reports that some would pour ice water over their bodies in the winter, believing that this would help curb their temptations. The problem is that these practices posed serious health risks, leading to serious illnesses such as pneumonia, especially among the youngest. Despite the Church's strict rules, not all convents followed the principles of chastity to the letter. In some abbeys, earthly desires were not only tolerated, but even cultivated to a surprising extent. The high ecclesiastical authorities were fully aware that some nuns could not resist temptation, and in certain cases they preferred to ignore the situation. The justification was simple. After all, everyone was a sinner, and depending on the circumstances, divine forgiveness seemed to be applied with unexpected leniency. From the 10th century onwards, the rules for women within the convents became even stricter, and scandals began to become a problem that was difficult to hide. One of the most emblematic cases was that of the English convent of Lyle's Hall, where, for almost 2 centuries, events occurred that had little or nothing to do with religious life. Some nuns disobeyed the rules of fasting, which was already considered a serious fault, but that was only the tip of the iceberg. What really shocked the community was the constant coming and going of men from the village, many of them visibly drunk, who had free access to the convent without any kind of restriction. The most impressive detail is that these visits did not happen by chance. To spend time with a nun, it was necessary to pay a fee that varied according to the situation. As in any other aspect of medieval society, money made all the difference. Wealthier visitors were often interested in young novices who had just entered the convent and who, at first, resisted the idea of participating in such interactions. However, as time went on, many ended up giving in to the pressure of their environment. The scandals involving the convents became a problem for the church, which feared that these revelations would damage its reputation. Measures were taken to curb the abuses, but in many cases, nothing seemed to be enough to completely eradicate the controversial practices. Over the centuries, the rules became stricter, but the nuns who tried to escape the harsh impositions continued to find ways to get around the prohibitions. Today, we look at these stories with a mix of curiosity and reflection. If the monastic rules had been less oppressive, could the history of monasteries have taken a different course? Leave your opinion in the comments and subscribe to the channel to continue exploring the most hidden secrets of religious history.